Dear friends, so today let's begin ahead with chapter 6. Name of the chapter is Children of the Rubbish Mountain. As the Kushal school started to attract more pupils, we moved again and finally had a television. My favorite program was Shakalaka Boom Boom, an Indian children's series about a boy called Sanju who has a magic pencil. Everything he drew became real. If he drew a vegetable or a policeman, the vegetable or policeman would magically appear. If he accidentally drew a snake, he could erase it and the snake would disappear. He used his pencil to help people, and I wanted that magic pencil more than anything else in the world. At night, I would pray, God, give me Sanju's pencil. I won't tell anyone. Just leave it in my cupboard. I will use it to make everyone happy. As soon as I finished praying, I would check the drawer. The pencil was never there. But I knew who I would help first. Just along the street from a new house was an abandoned strip of land that people used as a rubbish dump. There is no rubbish collection in Swat. Quickly it became a rubbish mountain. It didn't like walking near it as it smelled so bad. Sometimes we would spot rats running through it and crows would circle overhead. One day my brothers were not home and my mother had asked me to throw away some potato peel and eggshells. I wrinkled my nose as I approached, swatting away flies and making sure I didn't step on anything in my nice shoes. As I threw the rubbish on the mountain of rotting food, I saw something moving and I jumped. It was a girl about my age. Her hair was matted and her skin was covered in sores. She looked like I imagined Sashaka, the dirty woman they told us about in tales in the village to make us wash. The girl had a big sack and was sorting rubbish into piles, one for cans, one for bottle tops, another for glass, and another for paper. Nearby, there were boys fishing in the pile for metal using magnets on strings. I wanted to talk to the children, but I was too scared. That afternoon, when my father came home from school, I told him about the scavenger children and begged him to go with me to look. He tried to talk to them, but they ran away. He explained that the children would sell what they had sorted to a garbage shop for a few rupees. The shop would then sell it on profit. On the way back home, I noticed that he was in tears. Abba, you must give them free places at your school, I begged. He laughed. My mother and I had already persuaded him to give free places to a number of girls. Though my mother was not educated, she was the practical one in the family, the doer while my father was the talker. She was always out helping people. My father would get angry sometimes. He would arrive home at lunchtime and call out, Tur Pikai, I'm home, only to find out she was out and there was no lunch for him. Then he would find she was at the hospital visiting someone who was ill or had gone to help a family so he could not stay cross. Sometimes, though, she wouldn't be out because she was shopping for clothes in the China bazaar, and that would be a different matter. Wherever we lived, my mother filled her house with people. I shared my room with my cousin Anisa from the village, who had come to live with us so she could go to school, and a girl called Shehnaz, whose mother Sultana had once worked in our house. Shehnaz and her sister had also been sent out to collect garbage after their father had died, leaving them very poor. One of her brothers was mentally ill and was always doing strange things like setting fire to their clothes or selling the electric fan we gave them. Sultana was very short tempered, and my mother did not like having her in the house. But my father arranged a small allowance for her and place for Shehnaz and her brother at his school. Shehnaz had never been to school, so even though she was 2 years older than me, she was put 2 classes below, and she came to live with us so that I could help her. There was also Nuria, whose mother Kharu did some of her washing and cleaning, and Alishba, one of the daughters of Khalida, the woman who helped my mother with the cooking. Khalida had been sold into marriage to an old man who used to beat her, and eventually she ran away with her daughters. Her own family would not take her back because it is believed that a woman who has left her husband has brought shame on her family. For a while, her daughters also had to collect rubbish to survive. Her story was like something out of the novels I had started reading. The school had expanded a lot by then and had three buildings. The original one in Landikas was a primary school, then there was a high school for girls on Yahya Street, and one for boys with a big garden of roses near the remains of the Buddhist temple. We had about 800 students in total, and although the school was not really making money, my father gave away more than 100 free places, one of whom was a boy whose father Sharafat Ali had helped my father when he was a penniless college student. They were friends from the village. Sharafat Ali worked at the electricity company and he would give my father a few hundred rupees whenever he could spare them. My father was happy to be able to repay his kindness. Another one was a girl in my class named Kausar, whose father embroidered clothes and shawls, a trade our region is famous for. When we went on school trips to visit the mountains, I knew she couldn't afford them, so I would pay for her with my pocket money. Giving places to poor children didn't just mean my father lost their fees. Some of the richer parents took their children out of the school when they realized they were sharing classrooms with the sons and daughters of people who cleaned their houses or stitched their clothes. They thought it was shameful for their children to mix with those people from poor families. My mother said it was hard for the poor children to learn when they were not getting enough food at home. So some of the girls would come to our house for breakfast. My father joked that our home had become a boarding house. Having so many people around made it hard to study. I had been delighted to have my own room, and my father had even bought me a dressing table to work on. But now I had two other girls in my room. I want space, I cried. But then I felt guilty as I knew we were lucky. I thought back to the children working on the rubbish heap. I kept seeing the dirty face of the girl from the dump and continued to pester my father to give them places at our school. He tried to explain that those children were breadwinners, so if they went to school even for free, the whole family would go hungry. However, we got a wealthy philanthropist, Azad Khan, to pay for him to produce a leaflet asking, Kiya hasool alam in bachon ka hak nahi? Is education not the right of these children? My father printed thousands of these leaflets, left them at local meetings, and distributed them around. But then my father was becoming a well known figure in Swat. Even though he was not a Khan or a rich man, people listened to him. They knew he would have something interesting to say at workshops and seminars and wasn't afraid to criticize the authorities, even the army, which was now running our country. He was becoming known to the army too, and friends told him that the local commander had called him lethal in public. My father didn't know what exactly the brigadier meant, but in our country, where the army is so powerful, it did not bode well. One of his pet hates was the ghost schools. Influential people in remote areas persuaded the government to build schools which never saw a single pupil. Instead, they used the buildings for their hujras or even to keep their animals. There was even a case of a man drawing a teacher's pension when he had never taught a day in his life. Aside from corruption and bad government, my father's main concern in those days was the environment. Mingora was expanding quickly. Around 1,75,000 people now called it home, and our once fresh air was becoming very polluted. My father said only around half the town's population had access to safe drinking water, and most like us had no sanitation. So he and his friends set up something called the Global Peace Council, which, despite its name, had very local concerns. The name was ironic, and my father often laughed about it, but the organization's aim was serious: to preserve the environment of Swat and promote peace and education among local people. My father also loved to write poetry, sometimes about love, but often on controversial themes such as honor killings and women's rights. Once he visited Afghanistan for a poetry festival at the Kabul Intercontinental Hotel, where he read a poem about peace. It was mentioned as the most inspiring in the closing speech, and some in the audience asked him to repeat whole stanzas and couplets exclaiming wah wah when a particular line pleased them, which is a bit like bravo. Even my grandfather was proud. Son, may you be the star in the sky of knowledge, he used to say. We too were proud, but his higher profile meant we didn't see him very much. It was always a mother who shopped for our clothes and took us to hospital if we were ill. Even though in our culture, particularly for those of us from villages, a woman is not supposed to do these things alone. So one of my father's nephew would always go along with us. When my father was at home, he and his friend sat on the roof at dusk and talked politics endlessly. There was really one subject, 9/11. It might have changed whole world, but we were living right in the epicenter of everything. Osama bin Laden, the leader of Al Qaeda, had been living in Kandahar when the attack on the World Trade Center happened, and the Americans had sent thousands of troops to Afghanistan to catch him and overthrow the Taliban regime which had protected him. In Pakistan, we were still under the dictatorship, but Americans needed our help, just as it had in the 1980s to fight the Russians in Afghanistan. Just as the Russian invasion of Afghanistan had changed everything for General Zia, so 9/11 transformed General Musharraf from an international outcast. Suddenly, he was being invited to the White House by George W. Bush and to 10 Downing Street by Tony Blair. There was a major problem, however. Our own intelligence service ISI had virtually created the Taliban. Many officers were close to its leader, having known them for years and shared some of their beliefs. The ISI's Colonel Imam boasted he had trained 90,000 Taliban fighters and even became Pakistan's Consul General in Herat during the Taliban regime. We were not fans of the Taliban as we had heard they destroyed girls' school and blew up giant Buddha statues. We had many Buddhas of our own that we were proud of. But many Pashtuns did not like the bombing of Afghanistan or the way Pakistan was helping the Americans, even if it was only by allowing them to cross our airspace and stopping weapon supplies to the Taliban. We did not know then that Musharraf was also letting the Americans use our airfields. Some of our religious people saw Osama bin Laden as a hero. In the bazaar, you could buy posters of him on a white horse and box of sweet with his picture on them. These clerics said 9/11 was revenge on the Americans for what they had been doing to other people around the world. But they ignored the fact that people in the World Trade Center were innocent and had nothing to do. American policy and the Holy Quran clearly says it is wrong to kill people. Our people see conspiracies behind everything, and many argued that the attack was actually carried out by Jews as an excuse for America to launch a war on the Muslim world. Some of our newspapers printed stories that no Jews went to work at the World Trade Center that day. My father said this was rubbish. Musharraf told our people that he had no choice but to cooperate with Americans. He said they had told him either you are with us or you are with the terrorists, and threatened to bomb us back to the Stone Age if we stood against them. But we weren't exactly cooperating as the ISI was still army Taliban fighters and giving their leaders sanctuary in Quetta. They even persuaded the Americans to let them fly hundreds of Pakistani fighters out of the northern Afghanistan. The ISI chief asked the Americans to hold off their attack on Afghanistan until he had gone to Kandahar to ask the Taliban leader Mullah Omar to hand over bin Laden. Instead, he offered the Taliban help. In our province, Maulana Sufi Muhammad, who had fought in Afghanistan against the Russians, issued a fatwa against the US. He held a big meeting in Malkand where our ancestors had fought the British. The Pakistani government didn't stop him. The governor of our province issued a statement that anyone who wanted to fight in Afghanistan against NATO forces was free to do so. Some 12,000 young men from Swat wanted to help the Taliban. Many never came back. They were most likely killed, but as there is no proof of death, their wives can't be declared widows. It's very hard on them. My father's close friend Wahid Zaman's brother and brother in law were among the many who went to Afghanistan. Their wives and children are still waiting for them. I remember visiting them and feeling their longing. Even so, it all seemed far, far away from our peaceful garden valley. Afghanistan is less than 100 miles away, but to get there, you have to go through Bajaur, one of the tribal areas between Pakistan and the border with Afghanistan. Bin Laden and his men fled to the White Mountains of Tora Bora in eastern Afghanistan, where he had built a network of tunnels while fighting the Russians. They escaped through these and over the mountains into Kurram, another tribal agency. What we didn't know was that Bin Laden came to Swat and stayed in a remote village for a year, taking advantage of the Pashtunwali hospitality code. Anyone could see that Musharraf was double dealing, taking American money while still helping the jihadis, strategic assets, as the ISI calls them. The Americans say they gave Pakistan billions of dollars to help their campaign against Al Qaeda, but we didn't see a single cent. Musharraf built a mansion by Rawal Lake in Islamabad and bought an apartment in London. Every so often, an important American official would complain that we weren't doing enough, and then suddenly some big fish would be caught. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the mastermind of 9/11, was found in a house just a mile from the army chief's official residence in Rawalpindi. But President Bush kept praising Musharraf, inviting him to Washington and calling him his buddy. My father and his friends were disgusted. They said the Americans always prefer dealing with dictators in Pakistan. From an early age, I was interested in politics and sat on my father's knee listening to everything he and his friends discussed. But I was more concerned with matters closer to home, our own street to be exact. I told my friends at school about the rubbish dump children and that we should help. Not everyone wanted help, as they said the children were dirty and probably diseased, and their parents would not like them going to school with children like that. We can sit by and hope the government will help, but they won't. If I can help support one or two children and another family supports one or two, then between us we can help them all. I knew it was pointless appealing to Musharraf in my experience. If my father couldn't help with matters like these, there was only one option. I wrote a letter to God. I wrote, Dear God, I know you see everything, but there are so many things that maybe sometimes get missed, particularly now with the bombing in Afghanistan. But I don't think you would be happy if you saw the children on my road living on a rubbish dump. God gave me the strength and courage and make me perfect because I want to make this perfect world. Malala. The problem was I did not know how to get it to him. Somehow I thought it needed to go deep into the earth, so first I buried it in the garden. Then I thought it would get spoiled, so I put it in a plastic bag. But that didn't seem much use. We like to put sacred text in flowing waters, so I rolled it up, tied it to a piece of wood, placed a dandelion on top, and floated it in the stream which flows into the Swat River. Surely God would find it there. So friends, this is the end of chapter 6. Please stay tuned for next chapter. Keep listening and keep supporting.